To ask the Scottish Government regarding any implications for its deposit return scheme when it and its agencies were informed of Circularity Scotland's financial position, including the company's reported need to send staff home.
Minister Lorna Slater.
We have learned today that a process is underway to appoint administrators to CSL, leaving their staff in an extremely difficult position. This is an unforgivable consequence of the UK Government's 11th-hour intervention, which undermined...
Thank you, members.
...which undermined our deposit return scheme, made progress impossible, and is now resulting in these jobs being lost. This is clearly a concerning time for staff at Circularity Scotland, and we have been in regular contact with Circularity Scotland since the UK Government's decision. I wrote to Circularity Scotland to thank their staff for their hard work to get to a position where the DRS was ready to launch in Scotland, and to express our deep regret that we are now in this position. We continue to liaise with Circularity Scotland to consider how we may be able to support its staff, including providing PACE support, which is the Scottish Government's initiative for providing advice and guidance to people at risk of redundancy. In terms of when the Scottish Government knew that Circularity Scotland faced financial challenges, we warned the UK Government repeatedly that a failure to agree an exclusion to the UK Internal Market Act would jeopardise the scheme. At 9:45 p.m. on Friday the 26th of May, having first spent the day briefing the media, the UK Government informed us that they would only grant a partial, temporary and highly conditional exclusion. It was clear then that the UK Government had torpedoed Scotland's scheme.
Minister, I will have to ask you to conclude this response.
Since then, Circularity Scotland has been working tirelessly to identify a viable business model to take them forward, and they have kept us informed throughout.
Thank you. Sarah Boyackwhen.
Minister, we are in a situation where we now know that approximately 60 staff are sitting at home where they are unaware if they will be paid, with their chief executive advertising them on LinkedIn as 60 brilliant people available for roles. In her answer to written question S6W18398, the Minister said CSL has been a trusted partner. But the Minister told us, and we know from press releases, that Circularity Scotland said that the scheme could go ahead. So where do we view this now? Can the Minister really say that a company that acts like this, doesn't even follow the regulations set by this Parliament to inform ministers and SEPA of material changes in circumstances, is a partner that she is actually working with and the Scottish Government is working with? And how do we know what is going to happen next? Because the Minister claimed that she didn't know last week when we were all reading it in the newspapers.
Okay. As I say, there's a lot of interest in this. I'd be grateful for concise questions and responses. Minister.
Circularity Scotland had confidence that the scheme could go ahead without glass. However, the matter that is pernicious, that actually blocks the scheme, is those unreasonable conditions that were also placed at the same time as glass were removed. The member will recall that one of those conditions was that we match the deposit level, a cap that the UK has. The UK have not published their regulations and told us what that deposit level is. It is impossible for me to launch a deposit return scheme when I can't even tell businesses what the level of that deposit might be. And this is why we were not able to go forward. In terms of Circularity Scotland, they will now be appointing an administrator, and it will be for the administrator to decide how to move that forward.
Sarah Boyackwhen.
Under the regulations agreed by this Parliament, a scheme administrator has to be able to subsist for a period of 5 years. If it cannot, it must inform ministers and SEPAs of a change in circumstances which could ultimately require the Minister to draw its approval. So does the Minister have confidence that Circularity Scotland will be able to subsist for the entirety of the next 5 years? And what does going into hibernation mean?
Minister.
As I have just told Parliament, Circularity Scotland is entering into administration. They are applying an administrator. The conditions for the application of the scheme administrator were valid at the time that is done. The situation has changed in the last couple of weeks since that May 26th decision by the UK Government, and we are adapting, and Circularity Scotland are reacting to this situation that has been inflicted on us by the UK Government, who have changed its mind. Up until January this year, the UK government were saying in writing that it was for devolved administrations to decide on their deposit return schemes. They changed their mind in May at the last possible minute, and this is the situation which we are all now having to adapt to.
I call Kevin Stewart.
Presiding Officer, this is a deeply regrettable situation, but those staff who are now losing their jobs at CSL are not the only victims of the UK Government destroying Scotland's scheme. Circularity Scotland and their partners BIFA were also progressing a £7.7 million counting centre in Aberdeen and a similar facility in Motherwell. Can the Minister say how many jobs and livelihoods have been destroyed by the UK Government's decision to undermine Scotland's scheme?
Minister.
Scotland's deposit return scheme would have created up to 500 new green jobs, including, as the member highlights, in Aberdeen and Motherwell. We are in the very regrettable position that these new jobs are now at risk with our DRS being unable to launch. The UK Government clearly is not interested in investment in Scotland, in jobs in Scotland, nor respecting businesses in Scotland.
I call Douglas Lumsden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish National Investment Bank invested £9 million of public money into Circularity Scotland. Is that money now gone?
Minister.
Should I ask Alistair Jack about that?
The Scottish National Investment Bank is independent of government, and ministers are not involved in the decision-making at the Scottish National Investment Bank. Its investments are a commercial and in-confidence matter between the bank and CSL.
I call Mark Cruskell.
Thank you. Scotland's deposit return scheme was getting ready to go live, create jobs and make our streets cleaner before it was recklessly blocked by the UK Government. So when the Minister met with UK ministers to discuss their decision to impose unworkable conditions on our scheme, did they provide any reassurances that Scottish expertise and experience, much of which sits within Circularity Scotland, would be used to contribute to the development of a UK-wide scheme?
Minister.
I met the Minister for Environmental Quality and Resilience, Rebecca Powell, last week to discuss the implications and next steps for Scotland's deposit return scheme. I urged her to meet with Circularity Scotland as soon as possible to discuss how their expertise and experience could be utilised to deliver DRS across the UK in 2025. I also warned that, by not utilising this experience and without industry support, CSL would face imminent demise. Unfortunately, UK Government ministers have not followed this up, and no meetings between CSL and the UK Government have taken place. This clearly shows that this catastrophic UK Government are simply unwilling to take responsibility for their decisions and are not interested in Scottish jobs or Scottish businesses.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week at the Net Zero Committee, the Minister praised the expertise and experiences of the approximately 60 staff that now have no idea if they will get paid or have a job. Is the Minister concerned about the impact these job losses will have on the implementation of DRS?
Minister.
I am, of course, very concerned about the impact of the job losses on the people affected by these jobs, but I think it is telling that the producers who fund Circularity Scotland know that they are going to need to comply with a deposit return scheme down the line. Now, we've said 2025 because that's what the UK Government are saying, but producers clearly have no confidence that the UK Government are able to meet that 2025 deadline, and hence they have pulled their support in this way. Delivering the deposit return scheme in 2025, which I absolutely hope we can do, is dependent on the UK Government passing their regulations, putting in place a scheme administrator and doing all the work that we did here in Scotland. Their fastest route to success would be to take on board the expertise that we've developed here, and that includes the expertise at Circularity Scotland.
Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. CSL faced going into needless administration, as a scheme could have launched next year if the Scottish Government had chosen. And instead, the staff, 60-plus staff, are facing meaningless platitudes from the Minister. So can I ask, what support will be provided to those 60-plus staff?
Let's hear the member, please.
Redundancy?
Minister.
I am absolutely flabbergasted presiding officer, at how the member can say we can go ahead with the deposit return scheme when the member himself cannot tell me what the Tories in Westminster would set the deposit to.
Yeah. How much?
Nor can he.
How much is it going to be? How do you want to
Thank you. Nor can he tell me what fees to producers would be. Nor can he tell me what the fees to return handling fees would be. If he cannot tell me these, I cannot put together a viable business model for deposit return in Scotland. That is impossible. As for the staff at CSL, it is my understanding that they have been paid for the work that they are done, and we have offered PACE support, which is the Scottish Government's initiative for providing advice and guidance to people at risk of redundancy.
Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. But what an absolute disaster, a disaster for these employees and for the country. Two governments that simply cannot work together. And as a result, this government's incompetence has real consequences. So with Circularity Scotland now in administration, will that inevitably mean that industry pays twice to implement a deposit return scheme?
Minister.
I do recognise the member's statement that this is a disaster for those staff members. What I do not recognise is the representation of two governments working the same way. The Scottish Government at every point followed the common frameworks. We provided the advice. We set out what we were going to do. The UK Government changed their mind at the last minute. Between January and May, they changed what they were going to do. They broke out of the common frameworks process. They have not been working in good faith. And they made these decisions, imposed them on us, knowing that it would have catastrophic effects on our scheme, because I told them that that was the case. So the member must not misrepresent what's happened here, that we moved forward in good faith, got around, we estimate around £300 million of investment had made, Scottish businesses were moving forward, we had IT systems, sorting centres, vehicles. The UK government hasn't even got regulations. This is not two governments not working together. This is us working very hard and the UK government torpedoing us.
Thank you.